Right, can you hear me now? I think you can. I think that the sound has now come back. There we go. Right, hey guys, how's it going? Let's talk about the dark side of the ring. Grizzly in the shadow of Grizzly Smith episode. I apologize for that start there, guys. We had some audio issues at the start. Shout out to CR21 in the chat right now. But yeah, if you get kicked from the stream, guys, you know what to do. Just refresh. This was a chilling episode of Dark Side of the Ring. I didn't talk about the Ultimate Warrior episode because I didn't like it. We already got to see the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior. We know that he was a very, very, very polarizing figure and he had some demons backstage. But having seen the A&E documentary that WWE thankfully posted about that, it sort of took the edge off the Dark Side of the Ring episode. Although I did see the Dark Side of the Ring episode, I didn't feel the need to talk about it. But I'll say something here and I'll say I didn't like the episode. I wasn't a massive fan of it, to be honest. You know, we all know about the Warrior, and most of us at this stage now have forgiven the Warrior for his, you know, misdemeanors and issues, as I show you the random screen of pictures that I've downloaded of wrestling over the last few weeks. But yeah, this episode featuring Jake the Snake Roberts, Sam Houston, and the Rockin' Robin. For those who do not know who Sam Houston and Rockin' Robin are, Sam Houston was a highly rated professional wrestler in the 80s and the early 90s who suffered from multiple issues with drinking and etc., which we'll get to as I go forward. Rockin' Robin was a pioneer of female professional wrestling. She was a certified star in women's professional wrestling before women's professional wrestling was even taken serious. I'll be honest, she was a star before Alundra Blaze. Let's say that she was Alundra Blaze before Alundra Blaze was Alundra Blaze. She was the WWE's version, you know, the female version of Hulk Hogan, etc. Of course, we all know about the issues with Wendy Richter that took place as well. That if you haven't seen as part of the Dark Side of the Ring Fabulous Moolah episode, you'll get to see it there, guys. But yeah, Rockin' Robin, she basically picked up where Wendy Richter left off, and she became a star of female professional wrestling. And of course, the main character in this Dark Side of the Ring episode, Jake the Snake Roberts. For those people that are unaware, these three, Jake the Snake Roberts, Sam Houston and Rockin' Robin, are all biological brothers and sisters. It's something that I was absolutely unaware of. I had no idea that these three were actually in bloodline related, you know, actually officially related to each other. I don't know why I keep knocking that screen like that. They were officially related to each other in why they were in professional wrestling, and people still didn't know about it. I mean, maybe people in wrestling knew about it, but nobody behind the scenes knew about this, and, you know, the fans weren't aware of this. Maybe later down the line they were, but I wasn't aware of this until now. But we all know who Jake the Snake is, and we all know about many of his demons in the late 90s, early 2000s era of wrestling. But they did not just start then, they started a long time before. And it gave us an in-depth look into the person that these are all linked to. Of course, their biological father, Grizzly Smith, who himself was a star of professional wrestling in the territory days when you didn't need to necessarily be in the WWE or WWF. He was a certified star, I think, in the Texas area of wrestling and maybe the Dallas area of wrestling. Well, obviously Dallas is in Texas, but you guys know what I mean. Texas has got the Houston. They've got Houston. They've got a few other places in Texas where they run, well, where they used to have some quite big territorial companies. But I think Grizzly Smith was a massive star in the Texas territories, and he was a larger-than-life persona, but he also had some, let's just say, suspicious activity and behavior behind the scenes with young girls, and I will talk about that now. Grizzly Smith Adams, in my opinion, is nothing short of a disgusting and filthy paedophile and pervert who preyed on the lives and the you know, basically preyed on not just the young girls. He was obviously preying on their families, because their families were either so scared that they couldn't do nothing about it, or they were getting paid off, so they were getting extra money. But if you were one of these families and these parents that were sending your 13 and 14-year-old daughters, and then to the age of 8 and 9 and 10, 11-year-old daughters to spend time on the road with Grizzly Smith, then you are a disgrace. You know, there's probably multiple young girls out there that weren't filmed in as part of this documentary that remember these trips away. You know, these women are not going to be 25-year-old women now. They're going to be 40 and 45-year-old women who have probably had a long life, and, you know, probably not the easiest lives either. And, you know, I want to shout out to all of those women that may have suffered at the hands of the abuse of this disgusting scumbag and just filthy piece of work, Grizzly Smith Adams. I mean, what do you even say about this guy? Let's be honest, guys. What do we even mention about this guy? But yeah, that's Grizzly Smith Adams, to give you a perception of who this documentary is about, really, because it's obviously based on the careers of Jake the Snake Roberts and Rockin Robin and Sam Houston, because they're still alive to speak about what they've been through. But it isn't too much focused on the perception of Grizzly Smith Adams, because of course Grizzly Smith Adams died years ago. Now, if you've seen any of the Jake the Snake documentaries and things, you will know that when Jake the Snake was going through his worst time, you know, he reached out to his dad, and there were some rekindling moments for his dad where Jake the Snake, his dad finally told him that he loves him and he was proud of him, and, you know, respect to that situation. But we didn't know then that Grizzly Smith was this just absolute piece of work. But yeah, I'll drift back into Grizzly Smith as we go along, guys. I also would like to talk about the alcohol abuse that all three of these professional wrestlers suffered from, because Jake the Snake wasn't the only one who had alcohol and drug abuse. Rockin Robin self-confessed that when she stepped away from professional wrestling, she was having issues with alcohol, etc. And Sam Houston was always having issues with alcohol. He apparently would not know how to just stop drinking. He had no upper limit of it, and some people do. And what would happen is Sam Houston would get pulled over by the cops, and he had multiple DUIs in the Texas area, but because of who Grizzly Smith was, he would manage to get Houston off. But there were times when Houston would be driving, you know, 40 times over the speed limit, 20 times over the speed limit and stuff, yeah, over the alcohol limit, sorry, not speed limit, over the alcohol limit. And, you know, I don't even know how he was even able to even control the car, to be honest. But some people just able to keep their functions. But he was pulled over drink driving multiple times, and he ended up actually going to jail as part of this. And, you know, many people like myself who grew up in the 90s, who, you know, born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, we didn't really have much of an experience of these three. Obviously, I knew who Jake the Snake Roberts was, but a lot of people knew Jake the Snake Roberts from his born-again Christian gimmick in the WWE in the 1996, mainly because of the fact that he was quite pivotal in the start of the Austin 316 era, by default, of course. But a lot of people didn't really know the Jake the Snake Roberts that, you know, had feuded with Macho Man Randy Savage, that was probably the biggest heel in wrestling at one stage in professional wrestling. I just think back to those days now when I seen Jake the Snake Roberts in 1995 and 1996, and I do just think, you know what, if he could have sorted himself out there, there could have still been a chance for Jake the Snake to have been still on top at that point. But I just wish that I would have got to have seen a bit more of his career and a bit more of the top level of his career, rather than the stuff that I did go on to see. Because we can all talk about the negatives, but make no mistake, Jake the Snake Roberts was one of the biggest superstars in professional wrestling in the late 80s and early 90s. In fact, he may have been the biggest star in professional wrestling, because you can talk about Hulk Hogan, but Hulk Hogan was just the centerpiece. Jake Roberts was the type of guy who the fans came to see. Because without guys like Jake Roberts, there is no Hulk Hogan. Hogan, Savage, Warrior, they needed guys like this to be able to go over, because these guys could draw immense heat. And it would also make Hogan look like an, undefeatable superhero if he would beat someone like this. But saying that, it was disappointing, the career of Jake the Snake Roberts. Years later, I went on to see his work with Sting in WCW, a little bit of the Randy Savage, where he slapped Miss Elizabeth. Things like that really entertained me about Jake the Snake Roberts' career. And obviously, it really opened my eyes to who this character was, is, and could have been, and turned out to unfortunately be. But it speaks for itself when you know that Jake the Snake Roberts has self-confessed that he was being sexually abused as a teenager. Like, some people don't like to accept, and a lot of people don't understand. Sexual abuse does not just run for women and girls and stuff like that. There are elements that, if you're a 14, 15-year-old boy and your 23-year-old stepmom comes into your room and starts trying to touch you up, basically you're in a position where you've got no choice. Especially, you know what I mean? And it's been confessed by these people that he was basically being forced to have sex with women. Now, of course, to a child, the sex might not feel like abuse. To a boy, yeah? But it's still wrong. To a boy who's going through puberty and is hitting those kind of ages, you got to understand, from a perception of somebody who then went on to become a professional wrestler, he's basically admitting that Jake Roberts and Aurelio Smith, which is his real name, I was shocked to hear that, they are two completely different people. Jake is the bad guy. It's all the popular side of him that he wanted to be. Jake is the evil side, the side that he had to let out because he felt suffocated by who Aurelio was. And then, Aurelio is the weak, abused version of him. But I'm not joking, guys. In this episode, they were talking about, basically 2 out of these 3 kids suffered through sexual abuse, 1 from a woman and 1 from a man, the girl and the boy respectively. And the other one, he adored his dad. This is Sam Houston. He adored his dad. He lived in the shadow of his dad, but he just couldn't get the confidence to be the person that he wanted to be. So he turned to alcohol. And of course, for those people who are unaware, and for some people may know, that Sam Houston was the husband of the very popular female professional wrestler manager, and that was Baby Doll from the Mid-Atlantic and NWA Crockett days. She is Sam Houston's, she was his in real life wife, and even she said that just trying to get Sam Houston to tell his dad that he was going to get married, he needed to drink 30 whiskeys. Crown Royal whiskies or whatever they were. And it's like, wow, did this guy really need that much Dutch courage? But then you learn, and as they go along, and you learn real quickly, these kids were petrified of the man that they called dad. And he was a strange cat, like I said. Rumours started to circulate around the locker rooms about young girls sitting on his knee. Cornette made a comment about, him being one of the only people that sort of raised an eyebrow at the fact that Grizzly Smith Adams, what do you mean? Be aware that, if you've got young daughters, be aware that he might want them to sit on his knee and whatever else. I don't know what this guy was doing. I mean, it's pretty obvious what he was doing, but you know what I mean, guys? Like, as an example, I know some older men, I don't know them, but I've heard of stories, of girls getting older and realizing that they may have been abused by maybe their granddads. Not fully sexually where they've been touched in their areas, but more just to do with, sitting on your granddad's knee and your granddad rocking you on his knee when you're like 11 years old. Like that, some girls grow up and see that as different things. Like when you're 3 and you're 4 and you're 5, and I think that's what caused it. I think a lot of girls grow up and realize, what was he doing to me when I didn't know this was wrong? Because if he's doing this, why I do know it's wrong, what was he doing when I didn't know it was wrong? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, man. I don't know. It was a different time and it was a different thing. But to a person in 2021, the sound of, a young girl sitting on an older man's knee, it just doesn't seem right. you know, some young girls are innocent and they don't know what they're doing, and maybe they'll go and sit on their uncle's knee or their granddad's or their, you know, their sister's boyfriend's knee or whatever, not knowing what they're doing. That sounds fair enough to me. But when you get these dirty old men, like this Grizzly Smith character, that are literally going out of their way to get young girls to come and sit on their knee, and, you know, like Rockin Robin at one point sees her dad with a 9-year-old girl, and she takes the girl aside and she asks the girl, does he pull you up on the side of the road and ask you to sit on his knee and give you a kiss and stuff like that? And the little girl's like, yeah. Now remember, even though this is Dark Side of the Ring, guys, they can't really go into detail about the sort of things that a man would do to a 9-year-old girl that he's actually, you know, abusing. And I, nor will I go into the sort of things that, because I've got no idea. I presume, and the only way I can speak about it is I assume and presume that they would behave like it's a normal thing, like they behave like they would towards a young girl, like they would towards an older girl. But then you just don't know. A lot, you know, there are men out there that have got this insecurity complex, and Grizzly Smith Adams may have been a, you know, 6'7", nearly 7 foot giant of a man, but he could have had some insecurities that made him, you know, think that this kind of behavior was right when it obviously wasn't, guys. And as you can probably tell, I do get quite emotional, or quite, my pace of my voice does pick up when I speak about this Grizzly Adams character, because I can tell you for a fact, guys, 6'7" or not, if I'd have knew that this guy was doing this to little kids, if I'd have been anywhere near professional wrestling in the late 80s, early 90s, I would have bludgeoned him to death with a spade on the back of his garden, and then dug his grave for him. And I don't even care what people think of that. Like, at the end of the day, any man who comes in contact with a child, regardless if they're a boy or a girl, if you come in contact with a child, then you are a nonce. And that is what Grizzly Adams is, Grizzly Smith is. I keep thinking his name is Grizzly Adams. Is it Grizzly Adams? Grizzly Smith Adams? I don't know. Grizzly Smith he's a nonce. He's a paedophile and he's a nonce. He's disgusting. And yeah, obviously, I am going a little bit all over the place right now. But, you know, there was another child as well. I think his name was Richard. And he was apparently put up for adoption. But he actually sees it as in that he got lucky. Because Grizzly's relationship with his mum didn't work out, you know, he got sent to go and live in care or with grandparents or something like that. And he ended up having, like, not experienced any of this life. And he said he didn't like professional wrestling and stuff. So, and, you know, you got to remember, this was the territory days, guys, where guys were going into the ring and they were getting cut open and bleeding every single night of the week because they thought that's what it was that you needed to do to be able to, you know, get the fans to believe that wrestling was real, etc. I mean, he is clearly the one that, he knows his dad is a dangerous guy. He knows his dad can't be trusted. But because of the disconnect towards his dad, he doesn't really see his dad for what his dad is until it's probably too late. Whereas with Jake, he knew what his dad was about, and he knew exactly what his father was about, and he just wanted to be a better man than him. But Sam, he was completely oblivious. He wouldn't even accept what had happened. And there was a story in this where Rockin Robin says that her dad used to play games, and he had a little way of behaving. And he says when she was about 9 or 10 years old, he just stopped talking to her. She'd obviously started to change, and she'd started to grow up a little bit. And, you know, she was becoming more popular. And she was young, but she was becoming more popular with, you know, other kids, maybe possibly with the young boys and stuff. You know, she was a playful young girl. She had brothers, so she, you know, she was boisterous as well. And she said that her dad had been ignoring her for quite some time. And then all of a sudden, he called her into the room because her mum was away, yeah? And he called her into the room and he told her how much he loved her and stuff. And, you know, like she says, and this is true, to a little girl, that's all you want to hear. You want the approval of your parents. You want the approval of your dad. And she said this was everything to her. But she said this is also where he made his first, you know, where he touched her and he did something wrong to her. And obviously she knew straight away that this wasn't right or whatever. But, you know, as a child, she knew that, what do I do? Well, I can't really say anything to anyone. I can't really do anything to anyone. So I'm just going to keep it to myself. But obviously in time, she made sure that she never left herself alone with him. She drifted apart from him. as she got older and as she got more thingy. And she used to see, like, you know, like girls that were younger than her from her school that would be in the car with her dad. And, you know, like, imagine that. Imagine your dad picking up girls from your school that are younger than you and you're not even a teenager yet. This kind of sick stuff that was going on in this family. And like I said, it's very strange because these are all children of a professional wrestler at the time. And his image in professional wrestling is obviously helping him this stuff be covered up. Shout out to Kira in the chat right now. This image that he's got in professional wrestling is making it so that he, you know, is not being called out for these things. And people are either too scared or they don't want to say anything. And to the point where I'm not even lying, it was blatantly obvious that there were families, parents that were sending their children, little girls, on the road, meaning to different cities in the car with this paedophile. I don't know if they were scared. I don't know if they thought that they were going to get in the good books with the local community. It was a different time back then in places like Texas, you know. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. And I'll be honest, I don't know how you lot see it over there in America, but it was pretty much the same as England. People didn't really become aware of this. You're not allowed to have sexual contact with girls that are like 12 and 13 years old because it is not consensual. It can't be consensual. I don't know when the law changed in this country, but I know that there were some reports years ago that men could basically, you know, like, a guy would basically take his own daughter before she'd lost her virginity and stuff. He'd basically take her and leave her with, you know, one of his friends. And then they'd basically swap, you know, daughters' virginities with their friends and stuff. Just so that the men could say, oh yeah, well, we know our daughters are getting taken care of. These girls have got no intention of being married to these older men. It was just the way that things were back then, apparently. Now, that kind of stuff got outlawed in this country real quickly when they realised what certain people were doing. You don't have contact with young girls or young boys. You don't have any sort of thingy with them. And even if you're related to them, you don't. As I said earlier on, if your girlfriend's 12-year-old sister comes and sits on your knee, it could be a bit awkward, but it might not be as, you know, bad as it looks like if you as a 20-year-old man turn to your girlfriend's 12-year-old sister and say, yeah, I'll come and sit on my knee. That's a different thing. It's two completely different things. Now, some people might say, oh no, none of them are different. No, one of them is an innocent girl who doesn't realise what kind of danger that she might be in by sitting on that guy's knee. The other one is a creepy older boy or older man trying to confuse a little girl to do something that she might not be aware is a sexual thing. That's the difference in those things, yeah? You know, when you see a 7-year-old girl sitting on her dad's knee, that's one thing. When you see a 13-year-old girl sitting on her dad's knee, that's a whole different thing, in my opinion. I'm not trying to judge anyone, I'm just being honest. Shout out to Kira. No, it doesn't sound right at all. Like, it doesn't sound right. And like I said, guys, this is the dark side of the ring in the shadow of Grizzly Smith, the father, the real-life father of Jake the Snake Roberts, Sam Houston, and the Rockin Robin. I mean, I don't really know what to say, guys, when it comes to the actual fact of matter. Like, nobody ever said in this that he actually was having sex with these young girls. Nobody said that he was actually even touching these young girls. It was just insinuated that things were happening because of people's past experiences with this guy. It was blatantly obvious what was being said, in my opinion, guys. Why on earth would a 40-year-old man be riding around with other people's 9-year-old daughter in his car? I've got friends who are in their late 30s who have got 9 and 10, 11-year-old daughters. I wouldn't take them. I wouldn't even be comfortable even giving them a lift to the shop and back in 2021. Because I truly believe that the way to stop things like abuse is to never have a man, a grown man, left alone with a young girl. Because I'm not saying that I would ever do it. I know for a fact I would never do anything like that. But at the same time, you keep putting the temptation in front of certain people's eyes and they'll take advantage of it. There are many young girls out there that have been abused by their mum's boyfriend at some point, or by just random guys who their mum lets in their house. Because you know all this young people partying and stuff, yeah? You don't know who you're letting in your house. I know stories where girls have said to me that they were seeing some guy before and they knew something was weird, and their daughter came to them and said, "Oh, Mum, I woke up last night and that guy was touching me." And you got to let that sink in for a second. There are some evil, disgusting, nasty individuals that are out there, and I am telling you this right now. And if you give some of these men an inch, literally, because they're probably lacking in inches anyway, you give some of these men an inch and they will take a mile. If you have children out there, never, ever leave your children alone with anyone who they are not related to by blood, who you do not know for a fact would not abuse them. Even the men that you are related to should not be left alone with your children at any point unless you can certifiably guarantee that they will not be abused by that male. It's all right having beautiful and cute and, princess-like little daughters and stuff. But remember, when you're leaving them, or if you have sons, don't leave your sons when they're 14 and 15 and 16 alone with their little sisters. Not just because of them, because of their friends, because of other people. Do not do that. Yeah, fair enough. If your daughter's 15 years old and she's going out and she's probably, making out with boys and stuff like that, there's not much except you telling her off that you can do. But an 11 and 12-year-old girl's life could be destroyed from that age, from not knowing what is truly going off, trust me. And it's stories like this that shake people to the bone. A man who actually thinks that he is okay. And this guy wasn't just some random, like three wrestlers, random guy who was a wrestler, who was three professional wrestlers' dad. He was a professional wrestler himself. He was a star of professional wrestling himself. But at this point, I have to be weird and say, what were these parents doing? Why, Jake the Snake and his brother were wrestlers. Why did they allow their dad to continue to be able to do this horrific abuse and stuff, but not actually say or do anything about it? I'm sorry, but I could not be related to somebody, no matter how dangerous they were. I could not be related to somebody and know. In fact, related doesn't even come into it. I could not know that somebody was behaving like this and not do nothing about it. I'd have taken him out with a 45 as soon as I got a chance to. Regardless, for the safety of those children. But nonetheless, I'm going to move forward a little bit, guys, and I'm going to talk about Jake the Snake Roberts. For those who are unaware, in the late 90s, Jake the Snake Roberts self-destructed through the abuse of cocaine and alcohol. And he was pictured on camera, on, film, as part of wrestling shows. Why is it doing that again? That is not me. That's Omelette Arcade doing that on my behalf. Jake the Snake Roberts. Shout out to Tyrone Morgan as well in the chat. Jake the Snake Roberts self-destructed. He had multiple relapses, multiple overdoses, where he was basically binging on cocaine and crack and stuff like that. And he'd take these bookings in these lower down wrestling shows. And he'd just start doing what he wanted. Now, we only got to see what we've seen in the Heroes of Wrestling show. We didn't get to see what he did in the independent wrestling scene as a whole. So, let's just be honest, guys. If he was filmed on pay-per-view, taking his clothes off and pretending to use a snake as a penis and doing all kinds of weird stuff on pay-per-view, and I'm being honest, guys, this was filmed wrestling. This was supposed to be other things he'd been told to do, and he just kept getting in the ring and going into business for himself is what they call it. Going off script and going away from what they're supposed to be doing. He was in absolutely no condition to actually wrestle in some of these shows. But the promoters were too scared because of his name to not pay him. He'd be out of his mind on crack and cocaine and he'd turn up to these wrestling events and he'd demand extra money, and then he'd go off and go and get more drugs and stuff like that. He completely lost his relationship with his daughter as well. A lot of people who had seen it may have been Jake the Snake Roberts' own Dark Side of the Ring episode, or it was a Jake the Snake Roberts documentary that came out a few years ago, where it showed that his daughter just couldn't rekindle the relationship with him because of his drug abuse and because of his lies and the things that he'd done to her mum. And she was a bit of a spoiled brat, and she was a bit of a selfish bitch, to be honest, but she had every right to feel the way that she felt. They also had another sibling. I think her name was either Linda or Laura. And this was a strange one, guys. Like, you've got to understand, in the midst of all this abuse and these wrestlers becoming alcoholics and drug addicts, etc., somewhere along the lines, one of their sisters or their other sister was kidnapped and she was murdered. And I'm not even joking, guys. Just when you think that this story can't get any more convoluted, and like I say, I apologize for me going a little bit round the houses and just picking things out of the episode. But yeah, eventually, one of the sisters was kidnapped, and the kidnapping must have gone wrong. And I don't know what actually happened, but she ended up dying and she's never come back since. And they suspect that the person who had killed her was her husband's ex-wife, and she had kidnapped the sister to try and take some money probably from the family. And she was a big girl. She wouldn't have gone down without a fight, and I think that they killed her. But they never truly found out what happened to their sister. Can you imagine that, guys? Having grown up suffering from all that abuse, and then you become a professional wrestler, and then you start to experiment in alcohol and drugs to block out all of the trauma that you've been through when you were younger, and somehow you find out that your sister has been kidnapped and murdered. So if you need an example or an excuse as into why Jake the Snake Roberts turned out the way that he did, you're probably looking right into it now. Just the sounds of these events make me think in my mind, I would have at some point probably broken down, and I would have. But I can't deny, this whole Grizzly Smith family is one hella messed up family. You will struggle to find a family more dysfunctional that have been in the national spotlight at some point. Most of them, you will struggle to find a more dysfunctional family. This would be practically like the McMahons coming out now and Stephanie saying that, you know, whatever, and I don't want to talk slanderous, so I'm just going to say, you know, person A was doing this to her, and Shane coming out and telling you about how he used to get beaten by his, you know, members of the roster and that when he was younger. You know, this will be somewhere along the lines of this. Now, we all know about these families in wrestling, guys, like the Hart family and the McMahon family and the Flair family, you know, the Pritchard family. There are multiple families, the Watts family. There are multiple families in wrestling. Jarrett's, the Goulash family, the Gagnes. These people have been prevalent in professional wrestling. Jerry Lawler, which is part of, I think, the Nick Goulas era in Memphis. I could be wrong about that. But, you know, these families, the Carter family as well from TNA, these families have been prevalent in professional wrestling, and I apologize if there are more families. There are obviously more families out there, you know, like the what is his name? The Briscoe family, the Fonks, the Fargos. You guys get my picture. These people that have had family members in wrestling. Some people say it's nepotism. It's still happening now with the Samoan dynasty. They're all related. Nia Jax, Tamina, Roman, the Usos, they're all related to each other, guys. Trust me, all these people are related to each other. We hear stories about these families. It's normally involving crime and drugs and stuff like that. But you never really, and murder as well, but you never really get to hear it at this point of abuse and this shocking, disgusting, just overwhelmingly sick behavior and stuff. I mean, this was a proper Dark Side of the Ring episode, guys. I'm not even going to exaggerate. This was a true Dark Side of the Ring. This was as Dark Side of the Ring I think has ever been in the whole time that Dark Side of the Ring has been a thing. If anyone listening back now, if you've stayed with me until this point, if you can tell me a different Dark Side of the Ring episode that was this, and I'm going to say it this deep, then I'll give you credit. I can't think of a Dark Side of the Ring episode. I mean, the Bruiser Brody one was pretty sick, but it didn't involve sexual abuse from what I remember. So, but yeah, I'd have to go back over all of the Dark Side of the Ring episodes, and I'd have to actually label down which ones were the worst or which ones were just, eye-opening situations. But this one ranks right up there with eye-opening, shocking, surprising, informative, enlightening, because you realize why maybe Jake Roberts had the demons that he had, why Sam Houston is this name that a lot of wrestling fans know about but never seemed to have been the star that he probably should have been, and why Rockin' Robin only ever had maybe a 5 or 6 year run in professional wrestling and then practically disappeared off the face of the earth as regards to professional wrestling. It's a scary thing. It's a scary world. And it's a scary situation. But yeah, that is as much as I can really talk about from the Dark Side of the Ring episode. As I said, I'm not massive on the... And I probably should have taken some notes, but I had most of the notes in my head. I knew what I needed to talk about: the abuse, the paedophile, the drug abuse, the drink, the alcohol, the professional wrestling stardom. I mean, make no mistake, Jake the Snake Roberts was one of the biggest superstars in professional wrestling, and his career was marred by the drug abuse, and they knew about it backstage, but then they were all on cocaine back then. Hogan, the Warrior, they were all on cocaine, whether they admit this or not. I mean, no slander, but it's been highlighted that a lot of these wrestlers were dealing with cocaine and steroid abuse back then. It wasn't a good combination or a good cocktail. When you add in 25 whiskeys on top of that. Shout out to Christopher Mason in the chat. This was an intense and disturbing... It was an intense and disturbing episode, to be honest. It was a very, very disturbing episode. I mean, Grizzly Smith, I can't get this guy's name out of my head because, honestly, I would have blown this guy's head off with a shotgun if I'd have got within 15 feet of him. Like, I'm not even going to lie. He was probably the sickest individual. I mean, Chris, you know wrestling. I don't think there's ever been a more sicker. They may come out that there was, but in the public limelight, I don't think there's been more of a sicker, twisted, perverted individual in professional wrestling than this guy. I mean, I'd like to know what they come up with the hard-body Harrison if they ever do an episode on him, because his career is fascinating. But he wasn't a star. He was just in a company that was the biggest company at the time. Hard-body Harrison was not a star in professional wrestling. Grizzly Smith was, and so was Jake the Snake, and so was Sam Houston, and so was Rockin' Robin. These people had some kind of draw. It's not a coincidence, guys. It's not a coincidence. Jake the Snake Roberts was not an amateur wrestler. Neither was Sam Houston. These got jobs in professional wrestling because of who their family were. But they worked their asses off to become the stars that they became. But we had no idea that these wrestlers were being driven behind the scenes by trauma, by intense abuse, like recovery from incredible amounts of abuse and other stuff like that. We had no idea that this is what these people were going through backstage. It's a scary, scary, scary situation when you think about it. I mean, Rockin' Robin, if I can just talk about her for a few minutes. I just don't get it, guys. I just don't get it. I don't get how anyone could dispute what she's saying. She was clearly one of the biggest stars in professional wrestling, and her career just immediately went downhill. I mean, I don't know if she's covering up some things backstage. I also got the feeling that she knew more about situations than she was willing to let on. They also hinted a little bit, and I probably should have mentioned this before. They never said this. They never, ever said this. But her sister had confessed that she had been abused by the dad. They never said this. They never confirmed this. But I would be almost certain that the son or daughter of the child, of Rockin Robin's sister, Linda or Laura, is actually Grizzly Smith's child. The reason why I feel like that is because it's almost like they all wanted to say this, but they didn't want to say it, if you know what I mean, because he's still a man. He's still got to grow up. Maybe people know that he's the grandson of Grizzly Smith, and it would have been awkward. They never actually said and confirmed this, but they did give off the signs that Grizzly Smith was the father to his daughter's child. Now, that could be because the child himself is a man now and he didn't want to disclose this information. Linda is not around to defend herself because she unfortunately obviously was murdered. He's obviously gone through quite a lot in his life, losing his mum. To find out that your granddad is actually your dad and then your granddad's not here could be an even bigger thing. We don't know what kind of life that this person has had. We didn't get to meet him as part of the documentary or anything like that. But I would, and I don't know about anybody else, I would almost say that that seemed quite factual, that they were trying to overwhelmingly hint that Grizzly Smith Adams or Grizzly Smith had his child killed in this situation to prevent him from being exposed as what he was, because she had the one thing that could prove that he was definitely an abuser, and that was the son. And it wouldn't surprise me if after this episode, if there are 30 plus year old men who know that their mums are only 40 plus year old, like, think about my words now, guys. There could be a 30-year-old man out there now, born in, say, 1990, 1991, whose mum is only 40 years old. And I would be almost adamant that if they grew up within 50 miles of the house of Grizzly Smith and that their mum ever had contact with Grizzly Smith, then Grizzly Smith is probably their dad. We've heard stories about this before, guys. Female wrestlers though, not 9 and 10-year-old girls, female wrestlers who get into the business and they are basically forced to lay with certain wrestlers, and then they end up getting pregnant, and then they come back from being pregnant, and then they end up becoming, basically slaves to the wrestling industry, because then this family or this organization has control over their child. They have control over their life. And basically, it's a matter of you are a woman of the professional wrestling company. You're not a female star like Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch and, Thunder Rosa, Britt Baker. Back in the day, women wrestlers were different. The likes of Wendy Richter and Rockin Robin, they do confess that they had it a bit more easier. They were obviously offered, the favour for favour sort of situation. But most of these women back in the late 80s would kind of, say no or whatever. But some of them obviously didn't, guys. You think to say, like, these women who turn around and say that the guys who run these companies, not to disparage anyone. Shout out to the reviews from the 6th. Not to disparage anyone. I'm not going to name any names. But they've all been named before. Every single promotion and their owner, and you know who these guys are, guys. They have been named in the past. Women interviewers, backstage women personnel, female wrestlers, female managers, all saying basically because they didn't blow the guy who was in charge, they basically didn't get the job that they wanted. Now, yes, it's easy for these women to say these things. But when you know the characteristic of these men and these owners, then you will know exactly what they are capable of. And if other wrestlers and personnel start coming out and saying, oh, well, he was a little bit like that backstage, that can lead to some of the most disgusting and, you know, situations. And we all know about all the speaking out thing last year, where a lot of wrestlers were exposed because of their extracurricular activity outside of the wrestling business that featured wrestling stars, women, female wrestlers coming out and saying, but then I would argue and say, women that have been blatantly approached and told, if you don't do this, you need to do this, I can understand them. These women that kind of came out with the, oh, I was laying in bed and he was touching me up and I didn't feel like, I don't know about that, man. I've heard those things in real life. Girls claiming that they got drunk and they've woke up and they don't know what happened. And it's like, how did you end up in bed half naked with a guy? You don't get into somebody else's bed half naked thinking that it's going to be a friendly thing. You pass out on their settee fully clothed. That's when you've got that excuse, yeah? Those girls sometimes who say that because they've made a mistake, I don't really agree with that. But this isn't that scenario. This is a scenario of blatant, just constant abuse and people letting certain characters get away with the abuse because of who they are. It's not rare in wrestling, guys. That's not a rare thing in wrestling. There's a lot of power mad people in professional wrestling who would turn around and say that, well, they basically feel that they're Teflon, that they're untouchable to the rest of professional wrestling. Shout out to Heavy Hammer in the chat. I am just closing this down now, guys. I was just talking about the Dark Side of the Ring episode. As I said, one of the most disturbing and, you know, just gruesome episodes of Dark Side of the Ring. The reason why I've done a live stream on this, guys, is because of that. I knew I couldn't just condense this into a 3 or 4 minute talking thing because the Grizzly Smith thing just got to me, man. I really think in my mind, if I could get hold of that guy, I know he's been dead for 20 years or whatever, guys, but if I could get hold of him, oh my word, I would. Shout out to Heavy Hammer in the chat. What, did you record this, Heavy Hammer? I bet you didn't record it, did you? And shout out to Heavy Hammer for yesterday. It was his birthday yesterday. He turned 18 yesterday, ironically, I think. He's got a little mustache, growing a little beard and shit, growing a little goatee. But yeah, make sure you check Heavy Hammer out on YouTube, guys, if you're into the gaming and the Call of Duty gaming. But yeah, I think it's time now, guys, to close this down. Hammer, if you go in live, let me know. Everybody else, stay tuned for later on. I think I may do the AEW Dynamite review in about an hour's time. If I don't, I'll do it later on. But remember, NWA, When Our Shadows Fall, starts in about 3 hours. So I'll probably go live and do the AEW thing in about an hour and see what's going off. So Heavy Hammer, if you're going live for an hour or so, yeah, let me know and I'll join you for an hour before I do my AEW review. But yeah, guys, I'm going to leave it there. I appreciate everyone for stopping by, helping me out with the watch time. As I say, I have to be that guy to say, look, if you have got any spare time and you can put down your device for a few hours or you're taking a nap or whatever, I beg you just run one of my streams on silent, give me a few extra hours watch time. I am about 200 hours away from being monetized, and so, you know, I could do with all kinds of support at the moment. I'm doing everything I can. As you well noticed, guys, I've been cutting down the shorts. I've not even been doing some of the shorts recently because I need the watch time, and I'd rather have 4 or 5 people here like I've got now for 45 minutes an hour than have, you know, 1,000 people watch a 20-second video. So I'm gonna leave it at that, guys, and I appreciate you all for coming by. Please like, share, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.